Good morning, everyone. It's Sunday, August 18th. Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley is our guest this morning. Let's go on the record. The 2024 election cycle has taken some unexpected turns, and on the eve of the Democratic National Convention, the stakes are high. The rep from D7 is here. Let's break it down. Time to go on the record.
From WCVB Channel 5, the inside word from Washington to Beacon Hill. Today's newsmakers are going on the record.
Welcome to OTR, everyone. I'm Ed Harding, along with News Center 5's political reporter Sharmit Saketi. It's great to have you with us this morning. As you can see, with us at the round table this morning is Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley. She represents the state's 7th district. It's great to see you, Congresswoman. Thanks for your time.
Always good to be with you.
Great to see you.
All right, we are in a historic political moment right now. And let's talk about how we got here. Was the shift from President Biden to Vice President Kamala Harris as the nominee, do you think that was a fair process? Do you think it was done properly?
Well, what I can tell you as someone who's already been stomping for the VP in battleground states, key states like Pennsylvania, there's so much enthusiasm, excitement, and momentum. And I'm very confident about her ability to build the coalition that is necessary for us to win in November. What's also exciting to see is that a new electoral map is emerging. A new coalition of voters is being built, a Kamala Harris, Tim Walz voter. And so there are different states that are in play. I'm very excited with what I'm seeing amongst different constituencies as well, especially 18 to 35-year-olds. When I was in Pennsylvania on the ground, and I would ask them sort of what was the difference and how were they feeling in this moment. And a lot of them talked about they felt that Kamala Harris is future focused, that they feel more hopeful than they have felt in a long time.
Do you think the shift was fair, though? Do you think that was a fair process?
What I know in this moment, and I have to just acknowledge this, I want to thank Joe Biden. I want to thank him for 50 years of service to this country as a senator, as our vice president, and now as our president. And what he did in passing the torch, I think, showed great patriotism. And again, given the enthusiasm that we are seeing and feeling out there on the ground, not just in battleground states, but all over, I'm excited about the coalition that's being built. And moreover, as a founding member in the House of the Stop Project 2025 Task Force, it's very clear to me that people understand that the stakes could not be more dire.
And we'll drill down that in just a little bit, but I want to talk about a woman of color now tops the Democratic ticket. Very different world from just a month ago that we're in now, right?
And it's heady, as I talk about this diverse winning coalition, this new electoral map that is emerging in real time, women from every walk of life. I mean, people from every walk of life, but we can't pretend this doesn't have unique significance. That representation is so powerful, so long overdue. And women of every age and every walk of life, from literally 8-year-olds to 18 to 28 to 88, are so excited to be able to play a role, to finally see if we do our job in the next 80 plus days, to see a woman president. And I would just say as a note personally, in that I am the first person of color and first black woman to represent the Commonwealth of Massachusetts in Congress, the fact that I will be sharing a ballot, presumably if we do our work in the next 80 plus days, with the first woman president, who also is a woman of color.
What does that bring to the table?
Well, I think, all women, when we lead, what we bring to the table and what Kamala Harris will bring is a confluence of her lived and professional experiences. I mean, this is, let's not in any way give short shrift to her resume. She is poised, she's prepared, she's qualified, she's been an attorney general, she's been a United States senator, our vice president, and she's future focused and is going to build a country that is more just, that centers and sees everyone. And that has everything to do with her own upbringing. As a proud bonus mom myself, I love that she is Mamala, that she sees and embraces every sort of family model. And because she did serve in the Senate previously, I've had the opportunity to get to know her and to partner with her on really consequential issues, from the maternal mortality crisis with its disparate impact on black women. Certainly as myself as the lead negotiator in the House on student debt cancellation, we work very closely on that, voting rights. And so it is a heady moment. It is a long overdue moment. And so when you ask what does it mean to have a woman at the top of the ticket, I mean, imagine that we could have someone in the Oval Office who understands what a uterine fibroid is, who cares about the fact that less than 10% of healthcare providers are even literate in the menopausal body. I mean, one key issue that I cannot be remiss to mention as I travel this country, the issue of reproductive freedom, of abortion access and maternal justice, that is an incredibly motivating issue. Whether you live in a state where abortion is quite literally on the ballot or not, people understand that abortion access, which is health care, that is on the ballot everywhere. And she has been one of the most effective voices and champions in this moment when we see a Supreme Court, state legislatures that have been enlisted in an extremist march towards a national ban on abortion, which is a nation of forced birth. What could be more violent than that?
Let's talk about the man she's running against. Last month, during an appearance before a convention of black journalists, Donald Trump returned to identity politics. He questioned the racial background of Kamala Harris. Are you surprised he went there? Are you not surprised? Are you concerned that he went there?
I'm not surprised that he went there. This is, I certainly would have expected Donald Trump to traffic in racist and sexist tropes, in misogynoir. That is what I would expect from him. And it's what Kamala Harris would expect. I mean, she's been a woman of color her entire life. These are not new tactics. It is an old tactic from a tired playbook. And we're not distracted. We're not distracted or derailed by that. We are, prepared to handle those things and focused on the people of this country. And again, building that more just America and making both the affirmative Democratic case, also the proactive Democratic case, and reminding people just how dire the stakes are in this moment. This is arguably the most consequential election in our lifetime.
Earlier in the conversation, you mentioned Project 2025. Donald Trump insists he has nothing to do with it. I mean, he says nothing to do with it. That's his position.
Project 2025, this 900-plus page far right-wing manifesto, which is a policy and transition plan. It's not just some wish list, because my experience in my 5 years in Congress is that these extremists don't make threats, they make promises. And in Project 2025, they say Dobbs is just the beginning. And of course, we've already seen that play out. I chair the Abortion Rights and Access Task Force under the Pro-Choice Caucus. And first it was this extremist Supreme Court that had been enlisted as co-conspirators in this, overturning Roe, and then they went to birth control and contraceptives. We've seen that impact, a chilling effect, then IVF, then mifepristone. And Project 2025 is a dismantling of our federal government as we know it, of our democracy as we know it. A national ban on abortion, dismantling the Department of Education, dismantling the Department of Consumer Financial and Protection Bureau, a weaponized Supreme Court. This manifesto, which we have to do everything possible to ensure it does not become manifest, was written by Trump allies for a Trump White House to advance a Trump agenda. So his DNA and his fingerprints are all over it.
I want to get to Steward Health Care. You attended a rally not long ago to try to keep Kearney Hospital open. Now, some healthcare unions, they want the governor to do something more, declare a state of emergency, maybe the legislature to tap into an $8 billion rainy day fund to save both Kearney and Neshoba Valley. But it does appear as though right now those hospitals will close. The governor says she's doing what she can to keep the rest of the hospitals open. Do you think the governor can be doing more to keep Kearney and Neshoba Valley open?
Let me just say this. My family and I now call Hyde Park home, but for 12 years I lived in Dorchester. I've received care at Kearney Hospital, one of the shortest wait times in an ER in our city, patient-centered, culturally competent care, unique care for our veterans, psychiatric beds. They have provided such an important service for hundreds of years. I represent one of the most disparate districts when it comes to health outcomes in the Commonwealth. And I'm very concerned about those disparities being exacerbated. So I think there are three things that have to happen. One, we'll be exhaustive and innovative and looking at every way possible to keep Kearney open, though we know the clock is ticking there. But what are the tools available and how can we leverage them? Secondly, we have to focus on continuity of care, whether it's preventive or diagnostic or acute emergency care. Who can absorb that? I represent the highest density.
So is there anything the state can do?
I think, well, we're at the table and those are the conversations that we're having, but the things we need to be focused on are, let's do everything possible to see what we can do to keep it open. Secondly, let's focus on continuity of care. So who can absorb those needs? Is it our community health centers? What can they do?
Right.
And then finally, and then the third thing is this workforce, this dedicated workforce. When I went to Kearney, those folks who've been there 20, 30, 40, 50 years working there, from custodians to nurses to doctors, their first care and concern was about their patients. But it's my job to be concerned about, their labor and their livelihoods and their families as well. So in these closure agreements, we have to be fighting for their pensions, personal time off. So for those that don't want to continue working, making sure they get everything that they're owed, that they work so hard for. And for those that do want to continue working, that they have a soft landing.
Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley's in the chair. We're on the record. Stay with us.